Hiroshi Maeue was a Japanese serial killer that used the internet to lure in his victims. He created accounts on suicide forums and lured in his victims to their demise. This case is rarely talked about as it was poorly translated, and when I initially researched this case, it was difficult to find any information that wasn't in his native language. For that reason, the information on this case is very scattered, and I tried my best to put it all together. Therefore, I still think it's an interesting case to go over, and a great view into the mental state of a serial killer. But before we go into how he became a serial killer, we have to go back to the start. The year is 1968, August 8th. In the bustling city of Osaka, Hiroshi Maeue is born. He is the eldest son in a family of 4. From what little we know from his childhood, we know that his father was a police officer and was always busy with work. It's also said that he greatly admired his father despite rarely ever seeing him because he saw his father as justice. Though his father would later do something to him that would change Hiroshi forever, but more on that in a second. Hiroshi had a very troubling disorder, which would lead to his demise and the demise of 3 others. Hiroshi also had a history of attempted suicide from a young age, and had a weird compulsion with strangulation. From what little we know from his childhood, it's known that he began showing signs that something clearly wasn't right. Paraphilic psychosexual disorder. Unlike normal fantasies or sexual arousals, paraphilia or paraphilic disorders can be a lot more dangerous depending on the condition. Paraphilic disorders breeds a plethora of deplorable behaviors such as pedophilia or bestiality, as it is defined as a recurring and intense sexual urge that involves adults, children, inanimate objects, or the suffering and humiliation of said people. It's also worth noting that not all paraphilic disorders are inherently negative, but I can guarantee you Hiroshi's was. Hiroshi showed signs of a paraphilic disorder from a young age. It is said that his psychosexual disorder made it so he was unable to achieve sexual release without performing an act of strangulation. But how did this start? There's a few events in Hiroshi's life that could be attributed to the birth of this disorder or its growth, one of them being that when Hiroshi was in the 4th grade, his own father strangled him in his home. There's no physical or criminal evidence of this occurring, but Hiroshi claimed that this event forever changed him and shaped the way he viewed his father. There's not much info on why his father did that, but there's a few articles that state that Hiroshi's father would abuse him from a young age because he was a drunkard. This information was revealed by a psychiatric report after he committed the gruesome internet forum murders, which we will discuss later. Let's move on to the first oddity in Hiroshi's story. Because of the lack of information regarding Hiroshi's childhood, the dates of these events occurring are unknown, but we do know for a fact that during Hiroshi's elementary school years, he strangled multiple classmates during class. It goes to show you that paraphilic disorders can start from a young age and not just affect adults. But it gets a bit weirder. Not only did Hiroshi find sexual release in strangulation, but he also had a weird fetish for white socks. Hiroshi self-admitted that in kindergarten he had a teacher who wore white shoes, and for some reason that in itself would excite him. He didn't understand it at first, but then later in his middle school years, a female college student who came to intern walked in his class wearing white socks. This ignited the fanaticism for white intimate items in his heart. And according to Hiroshi, he didn't care if it's a female or a male, and that white socks and the act of strangling someone was enough to excite him. But why white socks? Some sources say that because his father was a policeman that wore a white helmet and drove around in a white motorcycle, because he has trauma from his father, it could be some psychological thing where he attaches to the aspects of his father. Though, we will really never know the full details of Hiroshi's trauma. Unfortunately, Hiroshi would never get the help he needed, and it would only get worse. Fast forward to 1988, Hiroshi is attending the Kanazawa Institute of Technology in the Ishikawa Prefecture of Japan. It is known for its many departments of engineering and human communication. Though Hiroshi's time at this institute would not last long. It is said that in 1988, while attending this institute, he attempted to strangle a male friend. He strangled his classmates simply because he was wearing white socks. There is little information on if he faced any legal trouble for this crime, but from what we know, he had to drop out in the same year. It's kind of crazy you could strangle someone and get away with it, right? Well, it doesn't end there. Then in April 1993, Hiroshi would then pass the civil service exam and return to Osaka to start working at a post office. Though this job would not last long, as you probably guessed. That's when, in 1995, Hiroshi was arrested and charged for beating and attempting to asphyxiate a male co-worker. Let's take a guess at why he did that. If you guessed that the co-worker was wearing white socks, then you'd be right. Hiroshi himself said that he couldn't control himself once he saw that he was wearing white socks. He was able to settle out of court, and once released, he was fired from his job. Some sources say that he was sued by the victim and his father ended up having to pay 10 million yen, or the equivalent of 40,000 USD at the time. I wish it would end there, but it doesn't. In 2001, he was arrested once more for none other than strangulation. He attempted to strangle 2 women and was sentenced to a year in prison and 3 years of suspended sentence. Unlike his previous victims, these were not men. It shows that his dangerous urges had no limit when it came to gender and even age. It also makes you wonder how he was getting such little punishments for the severity of his crimes. It's very likely that he never got the medical or psychiatric help he so desperately needed. Yet again, in April 2002, he was arrested, but this time for attempting to strangle a junior high school boy. It's worth noting that at the time of this crime, he was 34, which goes to show you how sick he was. For some reason, no one decided to check on his previous offenses, and if you ask me, his punishments were far too lenient. He had only served 10 months to this attempted murder on a schoolboy. When it comes to serial killers and criminals of this caliber, it's a tragedy when there were signs but no one decided to act on them. Which leads us to the Suicide Form murders. January 2005. Japan, having just celebrated the New Year, is now focusing on recovery efforts from the recent earthquakes in Niigata Prefecture. It is around this time that Hiroshi Maeue is released from prison for his previous crimes. He soon begins creating accounts on internet suicide forums. While it might sound unusual, these forums have existed since the early days of the internet. Tragically, Japan has faced high rates of suicide for decades, leading many suffering individuals to seek out suicide pacts online. These forums often attract vulnerable people who feel they have nothing left to live for, making them an ideal hunting ground for someone like Hiroshi, who is looking to exploit those vulnerabilities. Hiroshi would reach out to individuals under the guise of committing a joint suicide. Hiroshi lured his vulnerable victims by proposing a method of suicide that seemed painless, dying together through carbon monoxide poisoning, which involves inhaling the lethal fumes of a car's exhaust. He exploited the despair of those he met on suicide forums, presenting this method as a gentle and peaceful way to end their lives. It's not known how many individuals he attempted to lure, but he was successful with 3. After having the victims meet up with him, he would have a brief conversation with them and then proceed to strangle them instead of going through with the pact. I'm going to go more in depth about the murders in just a second, but it's also worth mentioning that in 2001, before the murders, Hiroshi actually had his own blog that he made where he wrote a novel. In this novel, the main character suffocates people to death, and what's particularly eerie is how the contents of his novel came to life through his murders. I mention this because I find it kind of crazy that he wrote this novel and essentially acted it out in real life. Junya is the name of the main character, and it's supposedly Hiroshi. Let's take this excerpt as an example. Junya's right hand gradually approached my nose. I shook my head from side to side, making a last stand. However, Junya's left hand was so strong that he was holding back my mouth and I couldn't resist. The moment I took a deep breath, Junya's right hand pinched my nose and blocked it. Everything in front of me turned pitch black and I lost consciousness. This might just seem like your average freaky ERP, but it'll make more sense in a second as it becomes obvious that he was planning to do this to somebody for years, as evident through his previous crimes. Which brings us to Michiko Nagamoto. His first victim was a 25-year-old woman from Toyonaka City named Michiko Nagamoto. Michiko was a woman born as the eldest of 2 siblings. It is said that she had a bright personality and grew up energetically, though later in her life she dropped out of high school and began working part-time. Around February 1998, she moved away from her parents' home and began working at a pachinko parlor. It is said that her relationships with the people she worked with and those around her were not well, and she became depressed. After that, she became sort of a hikikomori, which if you're not familiar with that word, it essentially means a person who has severe social withdrawal from society, seeking extreme isolation. She had eventually developed suicidal thoughts, as well as attempting suicide, and was even hospitalized multiple times. Her mother tried her best to help Michiko recover, and tried giving her all the love she possibly could. Michiko even had psychiatric help, but it wasn't enough, as she began to make forum posts on suicide forums. This is when Hiroshi spotted her post and began contacting her through email. He had sent over 20 emails to her in a back-and-forth conversation. Little by little, Michiko would start trusting Hiroshi. Then sometime in 2005 around February, Hiroshi sent her an email saying let's burn charcoal and commit suicide together. Prior to their meetup, Hiroshi actually instructed her to delete all her emails and any trace of the conversation, which Michiko actually did. This shows that Hiroshi had intent in getting away with the crime. Then, on the night of February 19th, they met up. Hiroshi rented a car and went to a supermarket to buy tape, plastic bags, and even paint thinner so that he could make the victims more disoriented as tortured. After picking up the murder tools at a supermarket, they met up at a parking lot up a mountain. He instructed Michiko to get in the back seat, and after she did, he began tying up her arms and legs with the tape he bought. One source also claims that he had put white socks on her. You might be thinking, did Michiko just allow herself to be tied up? And the answer is most likely yes. It is said that Hiroshi actually manipulated his victims into thinking that tying their arms and legs together was necessary because it would make it so they wouldn't struggle as much. This didn't make much sense to me at first, but if you're trying to end your own life, I guess tying yourself up will prevent you from struggling? I don't know. Either way it worked because he was able to tie up Michiko without much struggle. He then would cover her in paint thinner and began suffocating her by blocking her nose and mouth from being able to breathe. He would also take gauze, which is like a fabric, and he would dunk it in paint thinner and would gag her mouth with it. She fainted and awoke many times as Hiroshi would repeatedly make her faint and then force her to wake up so that he could make her suffer as much as possible. I wish I was exaggerating here, but throughout the whole court file, Hiroshi admits to having wanted his victims to suffer as much as possible. To make things worse, he also took pictures and videos of Michiko's dead body on his mobile camera and used that footage for reasons you could probably guess. Anyways, at 10 p.m. in the same day, after killing her, he would strip her of her clothes and drive up to a riverbank in Kawachi, Nagano City. He would dig a hole and he dumped Michiko's cold body in. The official court document also goes over how repeatedly Hiroshi would return back to the grave sites to check if the bodies had been discovered and even take pictures of the grave sites. There's some conflicting information on when her body was discovered, but the official court document states her body was found 4 days after she was murdered on February 23rd. Following this murder, Hiroshi would lay low for 2 months and stay off the suicide forums. After 2 months, Hiroshi noticed that Michiko's identity hadn't been discovered, or at least the news weren't reporting on it. Not only that, but Hiroshi's sexual urges were getting to him, and that led him to going back to the suicide forum to look for his next victim. Hiroshi's next victim is an unnamed 14-year-old boy who was a junior high school student. I'll call him Victim C from now on, as that's how he is referred to in the case. It is said that C was raised with great care and love from his parents, and that he would have yearly trips with his family. He apparently had hopes of becoming a lawyer and or a programmer in the future. It is said that in his third year of junior high school, he became depressed due to the worries about school life and went to see a psychiatrist. He was actually expected to get better since he was so young, but that didn't stop Hiroshi from manipulating him. Victim C began posting on internet suicide forums from an internet cafe in Kobe City. Hiroshi manipulated C in the same way he manipulated Michiko, in that he convinced C into thinking that they would take their lives together via carbon monoxide poisoning with charcoal. On May 20th, C would contact his friend via email and say that he was going to meet someone he met on a suicide website. On May 21st, C told his parents that he was going to Osaka, but they completely lost contact after him leaving. Hiroshi essentially kidnapped this boy and drove him into the mountains. He restrained him in the same way as Michiko, and would repeatedly beat him and force him to faint. One disgusting detail is that he would reawake the victim by slapping his face or punching him, so that it would force the victim to groan because he found pleasure in the groaning itself. C would also plead for his life, saying please stop doing this, and would say murder is not allowed. It's obvious to me that this is a loose translation, and what he really said was likely around the lines of, why are you trying to murder me? It's evil. He would continue to torture C until C had no more energy left to fight back, and that's when he would finish the job with suffocation. Hiroshi also recorded him struggling and even having a conversation with him as he was strangling him. It is said that this disturbing footage can be found somewhere on the Japanese internet, but I'm not going to try to look for this as I'd like to sleep tonight. After killing C, he would strip his clothes away and dump his body somewhere in the nearby forest near a trail. This is probably the saddest part of this case, as C was just a 14-year-old boy who was struggling and needed guidance, but it actually somehow gets even worse. After he killed C and dumped his body, he would call C's father and family and pretend to be a kidnapper. He would use a public phone far away from the crime scene and somehow use the voice changer. I'm not sure how he used the voice changer, but it's totally possible he just talked in a different pitch. He would threaten the family by saying he had C captive and that he was going to kill C if they didn't pay him 4 million yen, or about 40,000 USD at the time. Hiroshi told the family that if they called the police, that he would kill C and also come and kill the family or whoever was on the phone with them at the time. Even more fucked up is that Hiroshi would also call a second time pretending to be victim C and talking in a higher pitched voice, essentially trying to trick the family into thinking that C was still alive. Because of this, the police were actually thrown off at first and were investigating the disappearance of C as a kidnapping rather than a murder. This actually bought Hiroshi a bit more time, and leads us to his next victim. Hiroshi's next and final victim was an unnamed 21-year-old college student. For simplicity, I'm going to call him Victim D, as that was his alias in the report. D was born as the eldest of 4 children, and was said to receive strict but loving support from his parents. He was raised with great care and was given a lot of love among his siblings. He was apparently admired heavily by his siblings because of the role model he was. When he entered university, he started living on his own and working part-time while receiving a scholarship. He did this so that he would not put any financial burden on his parents. On his 3rd year of university, he was held back a grade because of poor placement scores and because he developed depression. D had also started visiting a psychiatric hospital sometime in 2005. His father said that they had a conversation with him in which they supported him and told him, "You can start over as many times as you want in your long life. If you think so, try your best, but if you don't like it, you can drop out." Then D reportedly said, "I'll do my best. I'll never do anything that'll make my parents cry. Don't worry." His father then said, "Well, I'll do my best to cure your illness." It is said that he returned home to his parents to stay with them 1 month before he was murdered in June. During this time, it is said that he was cheerful and enjoyed spending time with his family. Sadly, he was still a 21-year-old university student with a promising future, but Hiroshi had other plans. Just like with C and Michiko, he lured Victim D in the same way, promising a joint suicide via charcoal and carbon monoxide poisoning. On June 10, 2005, they went up to the same forest in which he killed C, and he tied up Victim D and began suffocating him. He held D there in the forest for over an hour, and would use plastic bags to cover his nose and mouth to suffocate him. What's so fucked up about this case and about D's death is that it wasn't just a simple suffocation in which he would die after a minute. Hiroshi would slap D's face and make him wake up so he would struggle more. In Hiroshi's own words from the report, "Because I wanted to see him desperately resisting and suffering, I gave them a few breaks, even to smoke cigarettes, etc." I'm not sure if he was the one smoking the cigarettes or the victim, but nonetheless, he wanted to see the victim wake up again and gasp for air. He would even talk to the victims. D would ask, "Why are you doing this? I don't want to die alone, please." And, "I don't want to die like this, so just kill me easily while I'm asleep with medicine, please." At around 7 p.m. on the same day is when Hiroshi finally suffocated him to death, putting an end to D's misery. After a few days, D's family called the police and filed the missing persons case. After killing D, he took photos of the dead body and then proceeded to take the clothes off of D, and then dumped his body off a cliff in the forest. Hiroshi actually intended to get away with his murders, as there is a full page in the file dedicated to showing the extent Hiroshi went to cover his tracks. As mentioned before, Hiroshi would instruct all of his victims to delete the emails and any forum post/communication with Hiroshi. The tools were thrown away after each crime, and the dirt and leaves from the crime scene would be cleaned off the rental car. The area around the tires would be cleaned, and he would even wipe the windows down inside and outside, as well as the inside of the car to get rid of fingerprints left by the victims. He had visited the site of the burials multiple times for sexual reasons, but also to check and see if the bodies were discovered. Hiroshi had used a voice synthesizer to make threatening voices to send them over the phone for ransom. I mention this because it's very important for prosecutors to understand why a criminal did what they did, but also to see if they were aware of what they did. As I'll discuss in a second, Hiroshi was clearly aware of what he was doing, and regardless of the fucked up disorders or disabilities he had, it doesn't take away the fact that he knew what he was doing. After his murders, Hiroshi rented out a house near his home which was filled with illegal videos related to suffocation. He had videos of his victims that he would use for his enjoyment. He would get cocky thinking that the police weren't on his trail, and he would start going to internet cafes and contacting other people on suicide forums, looking for a 4th victim. Luckily, there would be no 4th victim, because regardless of his high IQ and the measures he took to try to get away with it, there was a ton of miscalculations. Although Hiroshi took many steps to try not to get caught, police were able to catch up to Hiroshi because of the digital trail he had left while arranging meetings with his victims through the forums. The police were able to follow the online breadcrumbs into real life, which led them to link him to the disappearances of the victims. It was actually Hiroshi's first murder of Michiko that led the police to him. On February 23, 2005, the body of a young woman was found near the Sabo Dam in Kawachi, Nagano City. Her body was found in her underwear and was identified as Michiko Nagamoto. It wouldn't be until August 5th, where Hiroshi was arrested under suspicion of murdering her. The police were able to link back the crime to Hiroshi because they were able to recover deleted emails and conversations between each other. Hiroshi then admitted to the crime, but would not admit or bring up the murders of victim D and C. After some pressure from the police and more evidence coming out, he admitted to the murder of D and C and led police to find the bodies. Michiko's body was actually dug up by animals, which may have assisted in how fast it was discovered, though D and C's body were left to rot for months, and by the time police would find the bodies, there was practically nothing left but a skeleton. After confessing to the murders, the prosecutors were able to use the confession as well as all the digital and forensic evidence to lock in a conviction. Many times we will see cases where people who are clearly mentally ill commit crimes, but not always is it the case where being mentally ill equates to being legally insane or unfit to stand trial. It's also worth mentioning that Hiroshi frequently went to a psychiatrist once every 2 weeks. Even during the crimes, he would still see his doctor and undergo tests. Hiroshi himself said that he told his doctor about his urges to attack people and how he couldn't control it. It seems to me that no one looked at the signs that were there, and in the records it says that Hiroshi had strangled more than 50 people throughout his life. The fact that he got away with it for so long is unbelievable. But finally, on March 28, 2007, the Osaka District Court sentenced Hiroshi Maeue to death. And what's particularly interesting is that his defense team had launched an appeal, but on July 5, 2007, Hiroshi himself retracted the appeal. It is said that Hiroshi claimed to have accepted the judgment of the court and expressed a willingness to pay for his crimes with his life. After Hiroshi was sentenced and was waiting for his death, he would send letters back and forth with a psychiatrist. This is the same psychiatrist that performed mental health checks on Hiroshi throughout the trial. Hiroshi would continue talks with this psychiatrist because he wanted the world to know of what he went through mentally growing up with his disorders. In one handwritten letter from Hiroshi, he talks about his struggles growing up with Asperger's syndrome as well as savant syndrome. There's many more letters that they exchange, but this one is one of the only ones that are public. Eventually, Hiroshi requested to stop talking to the psychiatrist because he saw the psychiatrist as like a teacher who would teach Hiroshi about his problems. Because he saw the psychiatrist as a teacher, he felt as if creating a connection would be dreadful as he was going to be killed anyways. Therefore, he cut off communication with the only person that supposedly understood what went on in his mind. Thus, on July 28, 2009, Hiroshi was hung in Osaka alongside another 25-year-old serial killer by the name of Yukio Yamaji. Following the execution of Hiroshi, a lot of talks were sparked about internet regulation and safety, as well as the legal and ethical use of execution. This case prompted discussions on how to better monitor and regulate online spaces to prevent their misuse. The Japanese government faced pressure to take more proactive measures in monitoring forums that could lead to criminal activity or endangerment. There were also protests that followed in 2009 in regards to the death penalty, and also in regards to the last 3 executed inmates at that time, one of them being Hiroshi. This isn't the first case where someone lured a victim from a suicide pact website, and this also isn't the last. If this case was interesting to you, I recommend looking into the case of Yuka Takaoka, and also the case of the Japan Twitter serial killer. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as I might make more similar videos in the future. But for now, that is the story of Hiroshi Maeue.